to the overview slide. Here is the webinar series overview. Today is office hours. It's a new format where we will address the questions you raised the last 2 weeks, as well as new questions today. We want this to be a conversation and a discussion. So please ask your questions through the mic or in the chat. And we welcome you to message us privately if you want to ask your question anonymously. Then we'll address the issue publicly, but respect your anonymity. Objectives? Thank you. Our objective today is that you will be able to increase student learning and to inspire effective professional learning by number 3, more effectively planning and implementing lesson study using recommendations and information received from the office hours opportunity to discuss options for your sites and programs. This is our agenda and format today. After a very brief recap, we've organized your questions into the lesson study phases. Prepare, study, plan, teach and observe, reflect. Other are your questions that didn't fit neatly into the phases. For example, questions about virtual experience, long-term effects of lesson study, and research articles and resources. So without further ado, Jacques, you want to give us a recap?
Thank you, Sue. In the previous sessions, we reviewed these phases of lesson study, the 4 phases you see here, plus the one that comes before study, which is prepare. And as Sue said, we can discuss your questions within all of these phases, including prepare. And I want to point out the link that's on that slide. It's to the lesson study group at Mills College. If Toshko and Paulina, if either of you are interested in learning more about lesson study and are wondering where to go to get started, again, I recommend that site as the best repository of all things lesson study. A great combination of practical tools that can be used for implementation, a little bit of research, a little bit of teacher sharing about what works and what doesn't work. It's just an excellent repository for lesson study resources. And this is a revisit of a slide that we saw last week, I believe, in which we see that there are differences in the way countries' professional learning cultures operate. And in Japan, where lesson study was originally developed, the great majority of time and energy and effort is spent watching and discussing each other's classroom lessons and planning lessons collaboratively, whereas historically in our educational culture, professional learning activities primarily take the form of curriculum writing, curriculum alignment, working with standards, and then planning lessons individually. And there's much less of a commitment to collaboration. So I want to just share a perspective before we actually look more closely into the particular phases. And this has to do with one of the aspects of questions and concerns that came up. Let's see, I'm not sure what's happening with the slides. We should be on still the slide.
I apologize, Jacques. I
There we go.
accidentally proceeded with the slides.
Okay, sorry. Yeah. Thank you, Kevin. So I just want to say a few words about time and budget, because these are concerns that come up as a pattern in comments regarding implementing lesson study. And this slide shows that the process of professional learning in Japan really pays off in terms of what the results are if you put any stock into national rankings of education levels. Japan almost always appears very highly ranked. And interestingly enough, if you look at the other countries that are also very highly ranked, their professional learning operations are extremely similar. And in other words, teachers' jobs are viewed as having two distinct roles. And one, of course, is classroom instructor, but the other is professional learner. And their work hours are structured to accommodate both roles during the regular workday, embedded into their schedules. And so here lies the big challenge for us to try to implement lesson study. Because of our traditions, it's not in our nature to think in terms of teachers being professional learners or professional researchers. We are much more focused on classroom instruction almost exclusively. So we don't integrate professional learning into our work, and we don't structure school schedules and budgets to address that. But I think the issues are deeper than that, because we also very frequently just accept conventional thinking about those matters as if the conventional thinking is the truth. And maybe it's not the truth. Maybe it's just what we're familiar with. Before we get to some specific processes for making and budgeting time for lesson study, I want to invite you to reflect on where we are as a field and where we are as individuals in terms of professional learning, and to take a look at some of our own assumptions and beliefs that may be holding us back. So, first I'd like to ask what we can say about the return on investment of our professional learning practices and resources at our sites. As we noted in the first webinar, by a return on investment, we're really talking about the impact on teacher learning and on student learning. And what can we say about return on investment relative to what we do at our sites? Not in terms of satisfaction surveys, reaction surveys to professional learning activities, but in terms of real impact, real systemic impact on teachers and students. If we look at how much time and money our programs currently spend on professional learning and try to pinpoint the return on investment on that, it's extremely difficult for the great majority of us to even come close to knowing what the impact is, let alone articulate it. And here's why. In our system, historically and up until today, we basically engage in random acts of professional learning with little or no implementation follow-up and no measure of impact. You may recall last week when the former instructor from Oakland, adult Lisa Gonzalez, joined us. she said something like, we go to workshops, we learn something new, we may or may not try it, we may or may not get any feedback about how it works, and then we put the handouts in a file and put in a folder and put the folder in a file. So lesson study tries to get us away from that. We want to go more towards continuous systemic improvement rather than kind of one-shot professional learning activities with no implementation plans. And we know what works. We know that to achieve impact, professional learning has to follow the teaching and learning cycle, which lesson study does. And I would go as far as to say as to ignore that is malpractice on our parts as educators. If our doctors chose to ignore practices that have been proven to be most effective, and instead they just persisted in doing things the way that's comfortable or familiar with them, wouldn't we want to find someone more professional as soon as possible to work with? So in our roles as educators, I think we really have to reflect on the question, how professional are we in terms of dealing with professional learning? Are we going to practice what's proven and what's evidence-based and what's effective, or are we not? And I think our current system inadvertently perpetuates malpractice because it's the way we've done things forever. So to do lesson study or to do any authentic kind of professional learning, it is hard work. It's progressive work, transformational, culture change. It takes time and will and patience and commitment and good short-term planning and good long-term planning. And the good news is that it has been done and it can be done. The good news is that lesson study itself is not a difficult process. And it's one that practitioners embrace and support almost immediately when they start participating in a cycle. Lesson study is growing in every level of the US education system. And I'd say that adult ed simply needs a few people like us to step up and to get the ball rolling. So we hope some of you will be early adopters of lesson study. The California Department of Ed Adult Ed Division is beginning to show signs of advocating for lesson study. This webinar series is a really good example. So administrators and teachers alike need to demonstrate the kind of instructional leadership that says we're going to do the right thing, we're going to make some changes, it's going to take some time, we know that, and it's going to be well worth it. So a combination bottom-up and top-down approach works really well to get lesson study off the ground and to sustain it. So, I think we often hear the conventional wisdom of, we can't do it because it's too expensive, or we have to do these other professional learning activities, so we can't do lesson study, or we don't have time to do that kind of professional learning work and we shouldn't take time away from instruction. And there's a long, long list of attitudes like that, but these are not truths. I would say these are unexamined myths, and they're statements that represent our collective comfort levels and our collective lack of experience in implementing effective job embedded professional learning. And the research says very clearly that finding time in school is correlated with the motivation of the school to genuinely engage in professional learning work. So to a large extent, it's simply on us to get motivated and to stay motivated and to help others come along for the ride. In fact, that's how we got here today, by a few of us advocating for many, many, many years to broaden the opportunities to learn about lesson study. And we need to step back from those long-held assumptions about what we can and can't do in adult education, and examine alternatives. And there are many concrete tools to help us do that. I'm going to share two today. And actually, I think, let me check the chat. I believe one of them is already there. Yes, thank you, Sachiko, for posting it. It's establishing time for lesson study. Yes, wait a minute. Establishing, forgot the title now.
Establishing time for professional
For
learning.
professional learning, thank you. And let's see, there's also going to be a document posted soon called Making Time for Professional Learning. And let me talk briefly about each one. Kevin, would you mind please going to the establishing time link there? And we'll just take a look at a little bit of this document.
Absolutely. Just sharing the file in the chat here as well, of making
Okay,
time for
thank you.
professional learning.
Great. So the document that we're about to look at, again, like almost all documents for lesson study, is written for primarily for K-12. But there's a lot in it that we can learn from. Here's the document, by the way, you see at the bottom, it's a publication of a national professional learning organization called Learning Forward. I highly recommend becoming a member and taking advantage of their incredibly tremendous resources too. Kevin, if you could go to the table of contents, please. We'll take a look at how this document is structured. It's a workbook, and it's a workbook that leads people through 7 steps. On the upper half in the blue text, you see the titles of the 7 steps, and there's a little bit of an explanation about each one. So Kevin, I think there are actually live links. If you click on step 2, I think it'll take you, oh, it's not a live link. Okay, sorry. So let's go to page 14. I think the live links come here. So here's step 2. And this is related to what I was just speaking about in terms of examining our own thinking about time and essentially being curious about how we can do things differently rather than getting stuck in believing that we can't because we haven't in the past. So Kevin, if you could scroll down just a little bit on that same page, please. You'll see at the top there was a quick description, and here are tools, the workbook tools that give us opportunities to think about time. And so I hope I'm right here, Kevin. I think 2.1 in the blue, exploring assumptions about time. If you click on that, I believe that is a link. Let's see if I'm right. There we go. Okay. So that's how the book is structured. And here's an example of a tool. This is a tool that allows you to think about your own beliefs about time as a precursor to being prepared to consider making some changes about how time is used at a school. This is designed for a team, but it is really applicable for individuals too. And it's a wonderful opportunity to open our minds up about our beliefs and assumptions about time before we start the process of thinking about how we can change the way time is found and made and used at our sites. Kevin, if you could go to page 36, please. Yeah. Here's another tool, and here are instructions and directions of protocol for reading an article that follows in the same document that helps us think more clearly and drill down in more detail on how we can begin to approach the process of changing how we use professional learning time on our campuses and in our agencies and organizations. So I just wanted to share a little bit of this with you right now. I hope you will be inspired to take a look at it yourselves offline. Again, it's just a really great concrete set of tools for beginning the process of changing our relationship to professional learning time. Okay, Kevin, I think we can go back to the slideshow now. The other document that was posted in the link, the one called Making Time for Professional Learning. It's a PDF that Kevin posted in the chat. We won't be looking at it right now, but I want to tell you what it is. It's a 4-part worksheet that helps, that I adapted from some other resources to make it adult ed friendly. So this is an adult ed friendly opportunity to examine how you're currently using time for professional learning, and to start to think about options and alternatives for making additional time for professional learning. There are some ideas listed in advance, and instructions to use this with colleagues to be a catalyst for some brainstormed thought on what works best, what could possibly work at your school. So please take advantage of these tools. I wanted to share this right at the beginning because it is probably the major perceived obstacle that came out in your comments. And I hope that these items will be useful to you as you continue to think about and hopefully plan for lesson study at your sites. Okay. So
why don't we go on to the participants' questions?
Okay.
And those of you who joined us later, we've organized your questions in the phases of lesson study, and then a category of others that did not fit neatly into that. So the first phase is prepare. Do you want to talk about that at all, Jacques?
Oh, let's see. Well, I think the only thing that I would like to say about prepare, well, maybe a couple of things. The number 3, agreeing on a schedule. The stuff that I just shared, I think helps people think through what kind of scheduling options there are and which of them make sense for your own lesson study endeavors. So that's a very important thing to do, of course, to get off to a good start. And then there's one other thing I want to point out, and it has to do with number 7, deciding how to record and share materials. And this is what I want to share are a couple of links to a couple of resources. So Kevin, if you wouldn't mind, please sharing the links to the documents that speak to virtual professional learning. I'd appreciate that. Questions came up in the previous webinars about virtual professional learning, and these two documents that Kevin is about to post are really good. One is called, let's see, what sequence are they in? Bridging Distances, and let's see. It's about networked lesson study with 5 teachers from higher education across the United States describing how they used technology to conduct a lesson study cycle. They used synchronous and asynchronous approaches in a very seamless way, and report really good success with their endeavor. And the second one is called Virtual Tools and Protocols to Support Collaborative Reflection During Lesson Study. That is a report also from teachers who participated in a primarily virtual lesson study cycle. They also combined synchronous and asynchronous. They used video significantly and incredibly creatively. They also had an interesting variation of the lesson study process in which every teacher delivered the research lesson in their individual classrooms and recorded them, and then they all analyzed all of the presentations of the research lesson. An interesting twist on that theme. So those were just a couple of things I wanted to share about Prepare. And
so some of your questions that fit into this phase had to do with administrative support, certainly time, as Jacques talked about, coordinating schedules, how to get started, and how teachers are chosen. In terms of administrative support, I'd like to ask you, and again, feel free to open up your mic or to type in the chat. What do you see as the administrative challenge or resistance to lesson study? If you could engage us in that conversation.
yeah, so Toshiko and Paulina, we know that you may be feeling a little bit on the spot because you're the only two here, but we really want to encourage.
Oh, Aaron's here too.
Oh, Aaron's here too. Oh, okay, sorry.
Okay, so thank you, Aaron.
Okay.
Time and how to pay for the time. And again, Jacques talked about a culture change that not just for lesson study, but for professional development, and has given us a lot of resources for that. So I can speak to something about administrative support. I would engage with your administrator to see what the resistance is, because sometimes resistance is a fear or perhaps not knowing what it's about. So don't stop with the resistance or the challenge, but to investigate and engage in a conversation with your administrator. Let's see, won't support the concept, but that it could be tough. Yes, to get the financial backing. And we acknowledge that. It is a cultural change, a funding change. But again, Jacques has given you some things to work with. And maybe you and your administrator can think through these things.
Yeah, can I just add a couple of comments to time and how to pay for time? Both of the tools that were shared help think through that. But a really quick answer is a very good way to try to start is just to repurpose some existing budget and existing time, especially if you are starting small with a pilot project. You're not going to be doing this department-wide. It is highly recommended from everyone everywhere that you start small with a pilot. And if you take a little money away from a meeting here and a conference there, and you find a day in the school year when you can predict that attendance is going to be very low, combine classes on that day and allow the lesson study teachers to use that time to meet. There are all kinds of opportunities to find and create the time. And I'm going to repeat what I said at the beginning. The biggest obstacle is attitudes about time. It is not concrete opportunities to change time. The changing time is actually pretty easy when you sit down and work on it together. You see, Erin has her hand raised. Erin, come on the mic and share, please.
Thanks. And I don't have the camera set up right now, but I am following this, and I understand the culture shift, and I mean, I'm getting all that. I'm just thinking, if I truly wanted to do this, how I would do it is, the first thing I would do is I would find a simple lesson or a simple class session, and I would invite my administrator to come and do the observing, like cut to the chase of the study process that has observed. Can you come in and observe my students at this, and then meet with me after, and then talk with them and say, you know what, this is a lesson study thing, la la la, wouldn't it be great if we could blah blah blah. And that, to me, is how to effectively address the culture, rather than say, we have a project we'd like you to understand the importance of, and can you help us undertake this huge thing. But more like, here's a taste, and isn't this a cool way to look at how we're delivering our work here, and how can we improve. So that's just what goes through my head. I hate to sound like I'm tired of the whole thing, but I have my involvement with lesson study was in the 2000s. And so it's not current, but I have a tired switch that comes on when it's like, oh gosh, we have to try to help people understand this now. And it's been around forever. And so I like to kind of like go on the other end, like I said, and then, sort of, and then say, this is what this is. Are you interested or not? And then accept, whether or not we're going to be able to go forward with it. Simplified version. Thanks for letting me share the time there. I couldn't possibly write all that out.
That's fine. And Erin, I think your approach is one that everyone should keep in mind, because every administrator is different in terms of attitude, supports for professional learning, willingness to be creative, and every administrator has a different communication style. So some of you might feel perfectly comfortable that walking in and talking about lesson study would be good. Others of you know that would not go very far. And if Erin's solution or something similar comes up as an option, absolutely go for it. I'll say again, the important thing is just to get started somehow. And however you do it, we'll probably get the ball rolling.
Yeah, sounds like we need a community of practice to share these various ideas. Also in this prepare phase, there were questions about coordinating schedules and adapting to adult ed schedules. And again, can I ask you either on mic or in the chat, what do you see are the scheduling challenges? And while you do that, I can tell you a little bit about my own experience. One of the things that initially attracted me to lesson study was the the flexibility of schedules. And let me tell you what I mean. I was overseeing a program in 20, 30 different sites with different schedules. And at that time, we did not have dedicated professional learning time like PLC. So this answered my administrative question of how to provide professional learning for teachers, because those that were involved determined their own meeting schedule. I was not involved in that at all. So I just wanted to share with you that actually was my initial motivation for lesson study.
Also, I'd like to repeat about the importance of starting with the pilot. It just gives you lots of opportunities to feel out what works. And if you also think of the question, how can technology support our lesson study process? You might find ways to bring people, for example, from evening staff and morning staff together at a time when it is convenient for them to meet. And again, if you keep in mind synchronous and asynchronous, meaning having some kind of repository for all the materials that everyone might be looking at, making use of video recordings and putting them in your virtual repository, then everyone can access them as needed, and you can then minimize the meeting time logistics and maybe even the meeting time hours if some of the work can be done asynchronously.
Something about pilots. My general approach when trying something new is one, to call it a pilot, because then it's not okay. We'll see if it works. And my commitment to pilots was making sure that everyone involved, including students and staff, had a good experience, and you take it from there. We're going to take a little different approach now. I think I'm going to remind you of the questions that you asked, and in the interest of time, asking you what questions you want addressed, either from what you asked before or what has come up for you now. So questions from before were, how are teachers chosen? Examples of lesson study projects. How do you get an interesting topic so that teachers don't get bored? How do you deal with differing teachers' views on how to teach and agreeing on delivering a very specific lesson? Operations related to the classroom observations. And then again, the virtual experience. What are the long-term effects of lesson study? Did it really make a difference? And of course, at the end, we'll give you some resources. So we'd like to ask you now, among those or any new questions, what would you like us to address in the remaining time? You can go on, Mike, or in the chat. Maybe while people are thinking, Jacques, can you go to the slide on reflect and share? We didn't talk a lot about the share part. And I say this because we're talking about piloting and being successful. In the share part of it, what happened in Oakland was that the teachers, and you met Lisa and Audrey last week, made a presentation to our staff. And I want, the staff are inspired by others. And so it's important to have a pilot that's successful. And I want to say that 10 years later, a veteran teacher came up to me and said, Sue, can we do that thing that Audrey and Lisa did? So it made an impact on teachers. And again, I say a veteran teacher. One, be successful in your pilot and have your teachers share their experience. Questions? How do you measure the student progress, behavior, reactions? Does lesson study include formative assessment results? I see you nodding, Jacques. You want to address that?
Yes, let me go to plan. Toshiko, great question. And in terms of measuring progress, this is one of the professional aspects of this professional learning activity because it is built into the activity. And when a team designs the flow of instruction and creates the plan, it creates also a data collection plan. And the data collection plan has two main parts. One is a student assessment that is part of the research lesson. So that is the probably the most consequential data because it will tell the lesson study team the degree to which the research lesson was successful in reaching the stated objective of the lesson. The second part of the data is the student observation data. If you recall in lesson study, there is the team development of a research lesson. One volunteer from the team presents the research lesson. Others on the team observe, and the only thing they observe is students' response to their collaboratively created research lesson. So essentially, at key steps along the way in the lesson, are students responding the way we expected them to? And so that is incredibly powerful data. The more the data says students are responding the way we expected them to, the greater the success of your research lesson, and therefore the greater the learning that occurred in the lesson study cycle itself. It may sound a little smaller, a little narrow on the surface, but it's extraordinarily powerful when you sit down and look at that data together, and it can be communicated, and it is communicated as part of the sharing. So Toshiko, I don't know if that fully answers your question, but
and can I add something, Toshiko? In webinar 1, we showed a short clip of a video, how many seats. And if you go to that video, you will see how that works, where the teachers went into the classroom and noted student responses. Then they met afterwards and made changes because students weren't getting it. And then they taught it again. Another teacher taught the same lesson. So I refer you to that video where you can see it in action.
Thanks for that reminder, Sue. I just went to the reflect and share slide. And again, it shows the emphasis on data. You're reviewing data individually. You talk about the data and analyze it as a group. And then you make this decision about whether you're going to revise and reteach the lesson. That's based on the data. So it's a very data-informed process. And it's data that is more meaningful to teachers than most other data. It's real, it's current, and it's data that you are responding to immediately, which is a hallmark of professional learning activities.
Hope that's helpful to you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. So I wasn't here last week, so I didn't fully watched your the webinar last week. But I kind of introduced this idea of lesson study to my administrator. And well, we are doing PLC right now. And I think PLC includes a lesson study, I think. We come up with a common formative assessment, and then we try to teach a lesson or two. And then at the end, you measure with a common formative assessment pre and post, and then compare the results. And the challenge in the adult education is always the student population is constantly changing, because we have open enrollment system. So I did actually post common assessment last time back in December, and then now I promoted maybe 8 out of 20 students, and then we have 8 new students in. So we can't really compare pre and post, you know, for the same population. So that's really a challenge every time. And
Yes.
how do you do that in this lesson study?
Well-
and also like AM and PM, I mean, the evening students are very different. I would expect different reactions, different behaviors too.
Yes, so there were multiple questions there.
Yes, sorry.
Let's can you ask them one at a time? Because now my mind was going in three different directions.
Which
Oh, I know common formative assessment
Yes,
was
yes.
one. Yes, so certainly PLCs are larger. I think, and especially when you see the video, and as Jacques described, for lesson study, it's very specific to a lesson. So the changes in students are not so critical, because you're looking at a given lesson. Are the students getting it? And if not, let's change our lesson plan. And then you go to another classroom and another teacher teaches it. And are the students getting it better due to our revisions to the lesson plan? And then with the AM and PM, again, as an administrator, I had teachers in different locations, different times. So they volunteered and they made their own schedule when they could meet and when they would observe. So that takes it off of you. It's a reality, but you can work with it, and you can use substitutes if you know they meet at this if you're observing a teacher who's teaching at the same time that you teach. I think AM PM is not necessarily a challenge for a small group of teachers. And with the teachers that we talked with last time, Lisa and Audrey, their teams were 3. So 3 teachers can coordinate themselves. And I think most of the lesson study groups that I worked with were 3 teachers. Jacques, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think part of Toshiko's question had to do with the difference in the characteristics of students and classes from morning to evening. And to that, I would say, if there is a radical difference in curriculum, let's say in ESL, between a beginning high morning class and a beginning high evening class, that's a structural issue that needs to be addressed. Even if there are differences, there should be a huge overlap of curriculum that applies AM and PM. I mean, why would AM beginning high be so different from PM beginning high? And assuming that there's an overlap, within that overlap, teachers should be able to find a focus for lesson study. The focus in lesson study is really narrow. It's not a widespread thing. You're focusing on a very specific kind of skill. So theoretically, I think it should not be terribly difficult to find a skill that morning and evening teachers focus on at the same level, even if there are parts of the curriculum that are different, or parts of their pacing that are different because of the usual variety of factors.
Yes, to me, the curriculum is the same, but like a sequence of sort of lesson plan. For example, for AM students, they love to write, they love to listen, they love to sit down and then do their work. But the evening students, they want to stand up, they want to walk around, they want to chat more. And I always do the evening class speaking part, listening part first. And AM students, I do a little picture description or something to kind of introduce this concept or ideas first by just looking at it and then sink in. So these student behaviors, curriculum is the same, but the student behaviors I expect very different. And then to me, it's more meaningful to separate AM and PM teachers, and then what expected behaviors are sort of different expectation for each class.
Yes, thank you. And I'm reminded last week, Jacques talked about different kinds of teams. Certainly there can be teams with a similar curriculum or different curriculum, and there are different kinds of teams. And Sachiko noted that in adult ed, we often have multi-level and multi-subject classes. And I just want to share with you the lesson study project that Lisa and Audrey participated in. Two of the class, and it addressed literacy level students. There were 3 teachers. One teacher taught a literacy class. The other 2 teachers taught a multi-level class, but they focused on observing whether literacy students could transfer concrete concepts to paper and pencil. So it's, I think the approach is in your team, the three of us, let's say, what are we concerned about in our students' learning? No matter what level or subject matter, we have a common concern, and take it from there. We have a few minutes left. What burning questions do you have?
Thank you, Jacques and Sue. That was very nice. Yes.
You're very welcome. This is what this office hours is supposed to be about.
I saw Paulina unmute for a second earlier. Did you have a question or comment?
Yeah, I'm trying to type it in the chat, but I guess it'll be easier if I just say, I teach both in the morning and in the evening, and yes, my 2 groups are quite different from each other. However, I think that it's just the nature of teaching, right? All of our students are different, and we have to address their idiosyncrasies and meet them where they are, and it's just called differentiation to me. So I think I could definitely see teaching the same lesson both in the morning and in the evening, and just kind of adjusting with the different differentiation techniques for what my students are like and what they like to do, and if they're tired or whatever in the morning or in the evening, and kind of coping with that way. I don't know if that makes sense.
It does. It reminds me of Lisa saying she's her own lesson study with the 2 classes. What's missing is an outside observer to watch the students to see if they're getting it.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. So let's begin to wrap up here. We'd like to ask you, what are possible next steps for you for lesson study at your site? And as you see, it's easier to use your mic than to type. So we're curious, what are possible next steps for you?
And it sounds like some of you have already made some steps. We had a couple of mentions of either speaking with administrators or nuanced planning to bring administrators on board, as Erin described.
Hi, this is Cindy. Actually, the timing works out really well. Our ESL departments, we've been doing a lot of work, a lot of PLC work this year, and we have decided we don't have common summative level promotion assessments. So we decided that's something, we're just going to try to come up with something, standards-based, something to pilot by the end of our spring quarter. So I'm actually kind of now seeing how this could all fit together, which I think is good progress.
That's nice to hear. Thank you.
Yeah. So it's been very helpful, just kind of has been helpful to just unclutter all the information in my head.
Great. Thank you for sharing that, Cindy. I want to say that as any of you are thinking about next steps, I'll offer to be a thought partner with you. If you want to send me an email, we can set up a time to chat. I'd be happy to work through any initial questions that you might have. As you know, Sue and I are big believers in lesson study, and we really want to see it take off and be successful. So send me an email. I'd be happy to volunteer to talk with any or all of you to think things through with you. So take advantage of that.
And Jacques and I are joined at the hip. So when you email him, I'll be there too.
One more look at resources. Again, we encourage you to take a look at all of these. Also, I'll mention the books at the bottom again. They're both really great and are wonderful supports for anyone who is thinking about getting lesson study started up. A lot of the questions that you've asked today are addressed in those books, and it'll give you a catalyst for thinking about how to make it work at your sites. So do take advantage of those.
A quick thank you to Sachiko Oates and Kevin Belcher for your help and support, and thanks to all of you for participating in this webinar series. Jacques and I enjoyed it.
Yes, for those of you who engaged in 2 or all 3, we deeply appreciate your persistence. And I believe Sachiko is going to give us a heads up about some future webinars.
Yeah, thank you, Sue and Jacques, for this wonderful series, and thank you participants for joining us for the past 3 weeks. We have a few upcoming webinars, same time, Thursdays at 1 p.m. So if you are interested, please check out our event calendar, CalPro event calendar, and sign up for these 2 sessions. One is student leadership and how a couple of agencies are working on creating student council and ambassador programs. And in May, we're going to do social emotional learning. So please join us for our next webinars. Thank you again so much for joining us. And don't forget to submit the evaluation form. That's how we kind of, try to improve our services to the field. So thank you. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.